On today's PMEA's Take Note podcast, we are talking to Bob Morrison. You probably know the name, but you probably don't know all the work that he has done that is impacting music education. On today's PMEA's Take Note podcast. Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Despotakis. Welcome to this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. I am thrilled, excited, every other word you can fit in that category to have with us today, Bob Morrison. And I'll bring him in now. Many of you have heard the name Bob Morrison. You may know Bob. He currently, the title will say, he is the founder and CEO of Quadrant Research. But as we'll find out today, Bob has done so many things in music education, in the music industry, and so many things that have helped music education, music educators, and music students, and many that you probably don't even realize that Bob was responsible for making happen. So, Bob, I'm delighted to have you with us today.
Thanks, Mark. It's really great to be with you and great to be back in my old stomping grounds of Pennsylvania.
Exactly. Yeah, we're going to dive into that a little bit as well. But Bob is like I've known you for certainly most of my career, and just someone that I've looked up to and learned so much from. So hopefully today we're going to share some of that knowledge that you have as well to some folks who might not be as familiar with you. But yeah, let's go to your point. Let's before we dive into all the that type of stuff. Let's talk about you a little bit. So let's what was your first entrance into music education? Like, what's your background in that area? I don't even think I know that.
So it started really early on. My folks got me one of these, $20 drum sets back in, the late 1960s, and so I was, 6 or 7 years old in the basement, playing a cheap, learning to play on a cheap drum set to, songs that were on the radio at the time. The big one was Why Don't You Build Me Up Buttercup? So that was kind of the one that I was, went to school on. But that was before any formal kind of schooling. It was just kind of something that I was interested in. But in fourth grade, when we had the opportunity, I was living in Kimberton, Pennsylvania, and I was going to school at East Pikeland Elementary School. It's since closed. They had us, what instruments do you want to play? And I actually was interested in the trumpet, but the rental on the trumpet was kind of expensive, and I saw the drumsticks in the bin for like less than $1, and I'm like, well, I can afford drumsticks, so I got a pair of drumsticks in fourth grade and started from there. Went on through my career in schooling. Played in the junior high school. When I was in junior high school, my band director Bob Herr had us involved with some of the firemen parades, where we would go and play in the firemen bands for the various steel mill bands. I'm sorry, that would be popping up all over the place. And so we played in the Coatesville Steel Mill Band when I was in junior high school. I then moved to Maryland for 2 years for my sophomore and part of my junior year, and there I was in the Baltimore Colts marching band, where I signed up and played snare drum for a season before coming back to Phoenixville for the end of my junior and then my senior year. And I graduated from Phoenixville in 1979 with the great band director Mike Solik, who was my band director, and my assistant band director. His first year as an assistant band director was John Villella, and of Westchester University fame. And we, the percussion section, we just terrorized him. I still to this day apologize to him every time I see him for being an obnoxious 18-year-old or 17-year-old high school senior drummer. I was everything you would imagine a 17-year-old high school senior drummer would be and more.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I never heard that. All right. I love that. So, okay, after, your schooling, obviously you caught the bug. You caught the bug of music, percussion, marching. So then this is when like you have to make your career choice, right? So like what are you thinking as you're graduating high school?
So my grandfather was a celebrated journalist out on the West Coast. He was the executive editor of the Sacramento Bee and on the board of the McClatchy News Services. And I wanted to be a journalist. My plan was to go to school for journalism, but at the same time, in my senior year, we were at the Westchester Marching Band Festival with the high school, and this was in the fall of 1978. And the exhibition group was the Crossman Drum and Bugle Corps from Westchester, Pennsylvania, and when I saw them, I went to my buddy in the drum line and I said, hey, we should go try out for these guys. This looks like it would be a lot of fun. And so we went and auditioned for the Crossmen. And so my senior year, I actually made it in the Crossmen, carrying a 32-inch timpani for the 1979 competitive season. And so at that time, I was going to Penn State. I enrolled in Penn State, Delaware County to study journalism. And then from there, went to the University of Georgia. And when I was a freshman, I transferred to the University of Georgia to go to the Peabody School of Journalism. But very quickly, they realized and I realized that I really wasn't journalistic material. This is back in the day where we used typewriters. This is back in the day when we used whiteout. And it became very clear that I did not have the kind of command of the written language necessary to be a successful journalist. So the nice people at the Peabody School of Journalism in the University of Georgia encouraged me to find something else to do. So I ultimately, after my freshman year, I was doing my second year with the Crossmen, and one of the folks in our corps, Randy Blackburn, was the drum major at what was then Memphis State University. And they were giving scholarships out to folks to come to Memphis and be in the marching band. So I had the opportunity to do a quick audition, and they accepted me and gave me a scholarship. So I changed I changed schools, I changed majors, I became a music major, and I went to the University of Memphis at that time. So that's how I got into the music side of it, was because of my friend that was in the Corps with me.
So what were you thinking at a time when you go to Memphis and you're getting a degree in music? What was your thought process for once you graduate with that? What were you going to do?
Well, I was in the music ed track, but I also wanted to be a player. The whole idea was I wanted to play. But at the time, everyone counsels you, well, you probably should do an education degree so you can get a job just in case the playing side doesn't work out for you. And so I was studying that at the time, but then as I was getting ready to get into my junior year, my friend and teacher at the time, Tom Hannum, was working on his thesis at the University of Massachusetts, and he asked me to come up to the University of Massachusetts and help him work on his thesis, which was on marching cymbals of all things. And so I did that. I transferred to the University of Massachusetts. At the time, I had just gone, I'd aged out in 1982 and went with him to teach the Garfield Cadets in 1983. That's when I went to UMass, helped him with his thesis, and then, kind of took off from there, because my time with the Garfield Cadets, that was a period where, in 1983, where we created the front ensemble, where we actually took concert instruments, put them on the field, and treated the melodic instruments as its own voice, instead of the old days when they were marching xylophones and bells, where they were, largely just mimicking one of the lines from the horn parts. We actually created the front ensemble to create a brand new voice to go along with the battery, to go along with the horn line, to make its own musical contribution. So, that was a lot of fun as I was going through both my collegiate side and then also my drum corps side. I was learning a lot because I was just surrounded by some of the most brilliant people, to this day that I've ever met.
So I just like want to pause and like reiterate something here for people to realize. You just talk about it like, well, this happened, this happened. This is huge, right? This is actually huge in the evolution of drum corps, the evolution of marching band. Some people call you the father of the front ensemble for making that happen. So you mentioned earlier, yeah, when you marched, you carried, you marched with the timpani. Let's pin that for people to realize that that was a thing at one point. Go look at the photos, right? Like, but
I
then
strapped a 32-inch timpani strapped around my back.
imagine that, right? Okay, so was that part of the motivation of we're going to ground a front ensemble? Was that part of in the back of your head?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because after the first year, I went to our corps director, Robbie Robinson, and I said, look, it would make more sense if we would put all the drums down, have one person play, and I'll play all four drums, and then you take the three people that would have been on timpani and put them in the horn line.
Yeah.
And back then they were limited to 128 members, so they were always trying to figure out, how do we get more sound? How can we get bigger sound out of the horn line? I basically said, hey, put them down on the ground. I'll give you three more horn players, and everybody wins. And he agreed. And so the first year I played on planted marching timpani in 1980, and then in 1981 we actually went out and got concert timpani to play for my last two seasons.
So then, you mentioned the other big deal here is like you're at the cadets, right? And the cadets at that point in the early to mid 80s are the innovators. They are
Yes.
changing the activity, and you are on the ground as part of that. And I see them over your left shoulder in a
Yep.
photo as well. Talk about that. I don't even know what to ask about that time because there's probably so many stories and so many things, and probably a lot you can't tell because of drum corps lifestyle at the time. But I'm just curious, like, what was that period of time like for you?
It was incredibly creative. I mean, the the opportunity was that we had some young, talented people, and we were allowed to really stretch the boundaries. And to a certain degree, because of my training at Memphis and with my professor Frank Schaefer, we got a lot of exposure to percussion ensemble literature. So that was really developed in my vocabulary, so that when I started working with the Corps, that's what I drew from. I'm like, how do we put a percussion ensemble in front of the drum corps, and everyone certainly bought into that philosophy. And so, I was working with George Zingali, and Jim Prime was the horn arranger, and Donnie Van Doren was the brass caption head, and Tom Hannum was my writing partner. He was doing the battery, I was doing the front ensemble and the cymbals, and Peggy Twiggs was doing the color guard. It was just an incredible time. And Michael Cesario was our program coordinator. So you talk about an embarrassment of riches.
Right.
Every single person on that staff is in the DCI Hall of Fame because of what we were able to do, and the barriers we were able to break. And my friend Joey Gaudet and I talked about this after we won in 1983. We were sitting on the stands in Miami after winning the championship, and just kind of giggling and looking at each other going, just wait until we actually know what we're doing, right? Because we didn't. And I think that was some of the beauty of not knowing what the barriers were, right? We didn't go in saying, oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Nobody told us what we couldn't do, so we just did what we wanted to do. And that's led to a lot of the creativity and innovation. And you see that both in the look of the Corps, in the sound of the Corps, in the construction of the writing. But in particular, you look at the way that battery section was running around the field and playing at the same time. That was a year after everyone's just batteries moving up and down the 50-yard line. Now all of a sudden they're running backwards at 220 beats a minute and trying to play together. So it was a really innovative time, and some of the most cherished memories that I have, because again, we were young, we didn't know what we were doing, and as a result of that, we were incredibly creative at the time.
And absolutely change the activity. Just want to
Yeah.
keep reiterating that. And as you name those list of people, like, yeah, these are people who changed their respective part of the activity as well. Peggy Twigs with the Peggy spin. I mean, like that's,
Yep.
just all of the Tom Hannum. Obviously, there's so many things there. All right, so you do the cadets, and you end up with Santa Clara Vanguard.
Yeah, well, I think while I was at the cadets, in 1986, I was contacted by Pearl because we were Pearl drumline. We were one of the first Pearl drumlines as Pearl was just getting into marching percussion in the early 80s. And so I developed a close relationship with both Al Duffy, who was at Pearl, and one of their representatives was a gentleman that folks in Pennsylvania will know well, Al Moffett.
Absolutely.
Al Moffett was just a very good friend of mine, and a good supporter of the Corps. And so as we in 1986, toward the end of the season, I got a call from Al Duffy letting me know that Pearl had an opening on the West Coast. They were looking for somebody to maybe come in and help them with their West Coast operation, and suggested that I interview for the position. And so I interviewed for the job at Pearl, lied through my teeth because I was completely unqualified for the position, but ended up getting the job. And so in August of 1986, I moved from the East Coast to Southern California to become a branch manager overseeing the West Coast branch of Pearl Drum's artist relations and shipping facilities. And it was when I went out there, Ralph Hardiman and I had been friends, just as, the tight DCI community. He invited me to come up to Santa Clara to check out rehearsals in the spring of 1987. And at the time, we were also working on trying to recruit Santa Clara to become a Pearl drumline. So I was going up there to check him out just as a friend of Ralph's, but also, to, share with him the positive benefits of potentially being involved with Pearl. So Santa Clara switched to Pearl in 1987. And then, I went up and helped out with the Corps during 1987. And then 1988, Ralph wanted me to write with him. So he and I wrote together for the Phantom of the Opera shows for 88 and 89. So that was my introduction. It was kind of the beginning of my time at Pearl, and then the beginning of my time at Santa Clara, because I was now based on the West Coast.
And again, iconic. You think of Santa Clara; those are the iconic shows that you think of when you think of the Santa Clara Vanguard. So in some ways, it's right place, right time. For you to be there, but obviously your skill level proved what make that happen. So now you're in the music products industry as well. So now this is where your career kind of shifts to moving away from the teaching as much and really into that music industry space. So you're at Pearl. Kind of take us through the next steps of how your career evolves.
So when I was out in the West Coast, running the West Coast facility, had just gotten married in September of 1997, and in the early 1988, Al Duffy had made the pitch to the company that they wanted to expand really the marching percussion business and not only build the marching business but also the concert percussion business. And so they were going to bring me into Nashville from California to become Al's assistant in this new division for Yamaha. New division for Pearl. There's a Freudian slip there. For those that don't know, my daughter works for Yamaha,
Yeah.
so that's why that's front of mind sometimes. So literally my wife and I are driving across the country. We get to Oklahoma City. We're spending the night there. And we get a call from the hotel, and it's the president of our company at the time. And he was calling to let me know that Al Duffy had passed away. So the person that I was actually coming to Nashville to work with, to actually learn from, had just passed away. So when we got to Nashville, the first thing I did was go to Al's funeral. And the second thing that happened was the president of the company came to me and said, "You're it. You're now in charge." And so all of a sudden I went from being a West Coast branch manager to being in charge of developing their entire marching and concert percussion division. and this is back in the spring of 1988. And so that started, my real work with, drum designs, working with all the drum corps, and taking some time to really test and refine the products that we were bringing to market. And so that was a really fun time because we had a drum factory in Nashville. And I could go in the back in the factory and I could play around with the drums, and we could make different shell depths, and we could do different bearing edge cuts, and we could play with the snare bed and how the drum was vented. And and it was great because I was working with some of the great minds at the time. Marty Hurley from Phantom Regiment. We worked on that split snare that he had done with Ludwig. We tried to build something similar to that for him. With Ralph in Santa Clara, we played around with all sorts of different sizes and shapes and depths of tenor drums and snare drums. Worked on a 13-inch snare drum, worked on a thinner 14-inch snare drum. And then ultimately, we redesigned the entire championship series snare or series percussion line. And then in 1990, I didn't teach that year because we were busy developing a brand new drum that we were going to bring to market, and that drum is called the FFX. And that's kind of the drum that's sitting right over my shoulder there.
Yes.
That's the FFX. The FFX is now the greatest selling snare drum in the world, of any kind of snare, combo snare or anything else. No, there's been no other snare that has sold more units than the FFX. And that was a game changer. That was a game changer for the company. It was a game changer for the activity. And at the time, I was also working with Randy May, and we were developing all sorts of innovative designs around carriers using different materials like titanium and different types of aluminum, and working on different types of vest carriers and ways to make the carriers more ergonomically appropriate for the folks out in the field. So that was just an incredible time, and ultimately I was moved up to be the director of marketing and sales for the entire company. But this was also a transitionary time, because as I was doing research, as we were getting ready to expand some of our product lines, a question came up to me, and that was, how many schools have music programs? How many kids are involved in music? And at the time, nobody knew the answer to those questions. There was no data that was available. So that began kind of my quest for data. But at the same time, as I was doing taking some coursework at Vanderbilt for an executive MBA, one of the things that I also learned was that I'd always been focused on, well, what's Yamaha doing? Or what's Slingerland doing? Or what's Ludwig doing? And I came to realize that they were really not the competitor that I needed to worry about. The competitor that we needed to worry about was the government, because it was the government and changes that they would make to music education that was a greater threat to my business than anything that Yamaha or Ludwig or Slingerland or Premier could do. And that really turned my attention squarely onto the advocacy side, because I became very much aware that there were greater threats than what I had been trained to think about, and that got me started to get engaged with the industry. And with NAMM was the trade association for the music products industry, and Carl Brun, who was the head of market development, had started the National Commission for Music Education, and they were really getting their advocacy work going. So I volunteered. I spent time volunteering for NAMM with their commission hearings. I helped with their commission hearing in Nashville, Tennessee, and also with our Congressman Bob Clement was very engaged in advocating for music programs. So the fact that he was my congressman and we were there in Nashville and we were working with NAMM, that really got me integrated into the whole early advocacy movement here in the United States.
So I hope you're planning to write a book at some point in your life, and we're going to call it Game Changer. And then every chapter is going to be this game changer that you were a part of. And we've named like 5 or 6 of them already. And now we're on the precipice of, I think, the next kind of game changer that you did. So it's just incredible how your career has evolved. And so now, all right, you're looking at the advocacy piece and the importance of it, and you found this association that says we are a part of this, and we want to do this work. And so you're there volunteering, but then it goes a step further.
Yeah, Carl took me aside and said, "I'm going to be retiring, and this is in early 1992." And he goes, "I'm going to be retiring, at the end of 1993." And he goes, "I'd like you to consider coming to NAM and taking over for me, taking on the job of Director of Market Development," which was incredibly flattering at the time. And we also, as a family, Nora and I, were interested in being closer to the East Coast where our families were. And so after talking with Carl and then after talking with Larry Lincoln, who was president of NAM at the time, came up with a strategy that NAM would open a office in Washington, D.C., headquartered in the MENC building in Reston, Virginia. For those too young to remember, MENC was the predecessor organization to NAFME. And so that started my real engagement with the industry. So in July of 1993, I became Director of Market Development for NAM. I also was the Executive Director for the American Music Conference, which was their public relations arm of the industry. And that started my real work in the advocacy world, where Carl had set up the National Commission for Music Education, which released a report in 1992. I then took that and turned it into the National Coalition for Music Education and really began to build out nationwide strategies to advocate in support of music and arts education across the country.
And so this is kind of the first time really that there is that much organization around the idea of advocating, and perhaps now awareness for all of these associations or educators that we need to be focusing in this space. So again, this innovation that you're hugely part of. So now you've moved from the industry and you're kind of in the industry part, but with the association, but now you've realized this advocacy space and this, what can we do to actually help students in the nonprofit side of things. So now take us into that phase of your career.
So what was interesting when I got there, the first project that I did wasn't actually an advocacy project. It was more a promotion project. I was tasked to put a deal together with MTV Networks. And so I went to New York and met with the senior executives along with one of our board members at the time, Paul Murphy. We sat down with Tom Freston, who was chairman of MTV at the time, and put a pitch together about doing a contest. So we actually came up with this idea for the summer of '93 called the MTV Beach House Band Contest. Where students or bands could go into their local retailers and get their submission information and then turn in videotapes. And one of the bands from one of the participating retailers would be selected to become the MTV Beach House Band. And again, for those who aren't familiar with it, the MTV Beach House was the summer programming every year back in the early '90s. So that was a big thing for our members because, wow, all of a sudden we're getting this national, marketing push from, this iconic channel at the time. And I often talk about it as doing, you give people what they want so you can also give them what they need. So the MTV Beach House Band was giving the industry what they wanted. They wanted a big, splashy promotional thing. And that then gave us permission to do the things that we knew they needed. And that was investing in advocacy, investing in music and the brain research, and beginning to paint the picture for the value of music making in broader terms and not just the big splashy events. So the MTV gave us cover to do the important work that was valuable for the industry, but maybe they didn't know how valuable it was at the time.
So I obviously knew a lot of these things about your career. That I did not know, the MTV Beach House connection, because that was my era of watching MTV in the summer when I was off from school, and I watched the MTV Beach House. So I had no idea about that. Okay, so then I'm guessing the next step is, because MTV, the Viacom connection. I don't think it was Viacom at that point, but the MTV and VH1 connection. I'm guessing this is where the next phase of your career goes.
So the two were actually disconnected.
Okay.
And what I mean by that was early in my years at NAM, we did the Beach House Band. Then, again, we were doing the National Coalition for Music Education. We were investing in the music brain research, which ended up becoming cover stories on Newsweek magazine and on national television news about the impact of music making on early childhood brain development. We were involved with the film Mr. Holland's Opus. We were involved with a number of initiatives. The Charlie Horse Music Pizza television show on PBS with Sherry Lewis. Just a number of big things. The Piano 300 exhibit celebrating the 300th anniversary of the piano at the Smithsonian. So these were all big things. We were doing really big things. And this is on top of passing Goals 2000 to codify music and arts education as a core subject in 1994, releasing the first set of national standards for arts education in 1994, and then working to oversee the swift implementation of those standards in the following years. But by it was the fall of 1996 where we were just working with Michael Kamen to create the Mr. Holland's Opus Foundation, that we were contacted by the folks at VH1 about this idea that they had to create a new program called Save the Music, and they wanted to know if NAM would be involved and if we could help them get the program started. So I was the executive from NAM that was put in charge of working with VH1 and helping them along the way. And through that engagement, the work that we were doing with VH1 and with their president, John Sykes, was so important to him that he flew me to New York in May of 1998 and said, I'd like you to come work for me. And I looked at him and I said, John, I don't know anything about television. Why the heck would you want me to come work for you? And he said, Bob, I have a building filled with people that know all about making television. I want you to do what you do now. I just want you to do it for me. And that was a real revelation because, here was this executive, high-powered executive of this big media company basically saying, yeah, no, you don't need to know about TV. Just do what you're doing now, but bring those skills and help us over here and apply that to this idea that I have for this program called Save the Music. And that was the start of the program. Or start of my involvement actually as an employee of VH1 as their vice president of public affairs and the first CEO of the Save the Music Foundation.
So, all right, let's dive into that then. What you were there, on the ground as really Save the Music is starting at that point. What was that period like?
It was really interesting because the model that they had set up was, they'd done their first work in New York City. And when I was at NAM, we supported them with instruments and money. And they worked in this one school in New York City, and it was very successful. They donated instruments, they restored the program. But when they tried to go to a second city, they stumbled really badly. They tried to go to New York City, and it was very different because in New York they had the infrastructure, of all the employees, all the Viacom employees, people that would volunteer. Chicago, they didn't have any of that. And nor was there really a structure because the schools were submitting requests, we would get requests coming in. And I remember one day we got a request from a middle school that wanted a Fox bassoon. And I'm looking at that request and I'm going, why on earth would we buy a middle school a Fox bassoon? I said, for the price of a Fox bassoon, I can outfit a elementary beginning band program almost entirely with instruments. And that's when we began to change the model. Instead of people coming in requesting things, we were going to change the model. So I actually sat down with one of our board members and very famous music educator, giant, Sandy Feldstein, a very good friend of mine. He was on my board at Save the Music, and I said, Sandy, we need to change this model around. And so we began to plan, what does a beginning instrumental band program look like on average? And so we put these packages together, and instead of schools coming to us asking for stuff, we said, we're going to restore programs. If they don't have a program, we're going to come in with new instruments. But in order for them to get the new instruments, they have to agree to hire the teacher, and the program has to be a part of the school day so that it's a really restoring of the program. And we took 6 months to totally retool the idea behind Save the Music before we then came out in 1999 with kind of the new model where we were actually focused on restoring programs in schools. So that then began to lead to a lot of the more significant initiatives that we had. And what was great about having the Viacom resources at VH1, we had broadcast television. We had our affiliates around the country where we would go into a city, make a pledge of donations. The local affiliate would give us airtime to run all of our public service announcements and do the local media coverage. So all of a sudden we had this national distribution network that we could work with to both raise awareness and then help us restore programs. And along with that, we had the VH1 Divas concerts. We were doing the VH1 Save the Music at the Today Show until our CBS brethren got kind of upset about that, and we then made it the VH1 Save the Music program for CBS Morning Show. So,
right.
So and it was, and then we did in 2000 we did the concert of the century in 1999 at the White House in advance of the year 2000, and it was just an incredible period of time because. The cable industry was really big at that time. I was very involved with the National Cable Television Association with our work in public affairs. It was an incredible time to be an advocate a young advocate, really cutting my teeth, and then to have all of these tools at my disposal, from television to stars to news media to everything. It was pretty heady stuff at the time, and again, just incredible moments.
So, as you're describing the time frame, you're working in New York City at that point, and you're actually working in New York City on September 11th. And just interest of time, we're not going to go into that whole story here, but I will tell people, go to your Substack and to read that story to understand, your tale of that day. That we all have our remembrance of that day, but that it's fascinating. So I would encourage people to go and take some time to sit and read through that. So, okay, so VH1 now you're changing so many things. You're being so innovative as you've been at every other step of your career. All right, so are you thinking what's next, or are you just what's in your head there at that point?
Well, I mean, it's just we were rolling. I mean, we were restoring hundreds of programs every year, impacting tens of thousands of students, and all the way through my first 5 years there, I think that we donated over $25 million of instruments, restored over 1,200 programs. It was really that's the good work, right? That's how we would know we're making change. The kids that didn't have programs now had programs. But in 2002, John Sykes got promoted and left VH1 to become head of CBS Radio. And when he went, they brought in a new CEO for VH1. And like all environments, new CEOs come in and they have their own priorities. John loved Save the Music. It was his baby. It was his idea. And he was incredibly supportive the entire time. But the new CEO came in, wasn't her idea. She wasn't really all that interested in it. And it became very hard and difficult for me to operate in that particular environment. And at the same time, I was a senior executive, on her senior team. And everybody that was on the senior team with me, all of a sudden they were leaving. They were being let go, or they were getting other jobs. And, finally I was the last John Sykes employee standing. And it became clear to me that wasn't going to last very long. So in 2003, I left in the summer of 2003 because I wanted to start my own thing. I've been building stuff for everyone else all these years, and I said, maybe it's time for me to build my own thing. And in the fall of 2003, I began laying the groundwork for what would become Music for All. And that was the beginning of creating Music for All, because I felt we needed better arguments. I felt we needed better data and we needed better tools to fight for our programs. And that was really the premise for the creation of Music for All, which we then launched in January of 2004.
Yeah, so I think let's just like level set for folks. Music for All then is not what Music for All is now.
Correct.
So, and I want you to explain a bit of that piece. But what I think is interesting is like this: you came to all of this from all of this experience at all of these different things, and said, "Okay, now here's what I think we can do with all of this. If I take the tools that I've found in all of these places and learned, and you're going to create Music for All." So tell
Correct.
us a little bit more about what Music for All did at that point.
At that point in time, it was really about advocacy, data, and messaging. A friend of mine that I developed a relationship at the time was a gentleman most people know by the name of Sir Ken Robinson. And Sir Ken and I were working together, and I was bouncing ideas off of him. And one of the things that we wanted to do was get better data, better research. So we got some information in 2004 from the state of California. And as we started doing an analysis of it, it became pretty clear that California was in crisis, but nobody really knew about it. The data that we were reviewing showed that there was a 50% decline in elementary music enrollment between 1999 and 2004. And so we very quickly released our first report in the fall or September of 2004 called The Sound of Silence, the Unprecedented Decline of Music Education in California Public Schools. And that report became a catalyst for change in California. It got the attention of Governor Schwarzenegger. They then made some reinvestments into strengthening programs, as a result. And that was a real lesson and a real turning point for me because it showed me that with very little investment of dollars, with good data, you could really leverage transformation. And that's when I really began to double down and, okay, how do we get more data? And that led to us doing the census project in New Jersey, which was the first statewide measurement of building level arts education in the United States. And that particular report, when it was released, really led to kind of our pathway down this data pathway. At the same time, we were involved with the band Bon Jovi, and David Bryan was helping us with fundraising. We were selling blue bracelets to raise money, and that money was paying for the research and paying for the advocacy. We were co-sponsoring events at the Democratic and Republican National Convention in 2004, along with Americans for the Arts and NAM and the Creative Coalition. And then in 2005, the NAM show, Summer NAM, was in Indianapolis, and we were at the Summer NAM show, and they had a kiosk area for nonprofits, and I was there with Music for All, and Scott McCormick was there with Bands of America, and our kiosks were sitting next to each other, and he was standing backwards with me looking at the booth, and he's looking at my booth, and looking at his booth, and looking at my booth, and looking at his booth, and he looked at me and he goes, "We should talk." And that was really the beginning of the conversations around merging Music for All and Bands of America together. Now, at the time, I was on the board of Bands of America, as was Sandy Feldstein, and we talked about the benefits of the merger. That on Bands of America's strategic plan, they wanted to have an umbrella, a larger umbrella, because they were doing orchestra and choir work, and it felt like the Bands of America label was kind of inhibiting to them for those kind of programs. So the idea of having an umbrella brand under which to build out other programming, became very important to them. And, as we talked about it, it seemed like marrying their programmatic activity along with our research and advocacy work would be a really good combination. And in 2006, we merged Music for All and Bands of America together to create Music for All, Inc.
So we won't go down the Music for All, what it becomes at that point route. If you were interested in that, go back to a podcast a few months ago when we talked to Cam Stasa from Music for All, when you get the history of from her perspective, and she talks about at that point. So, okay, so there's this merger, and obviously that makes complete sense, and we see what Music for All has become now, and it's just incredible, and it continues to grow and what they do. Okay, but now it's merged, and where does that leave you, and what's next for you?
Well, when we merged, I made it clear we weren't going to move to Indianapolis. We had, settled down here on the East Coast, and I knew at the time that your CEO needs to be where your people are. So I was just like, I'll just, continue to do more of the research advocacy focus. But they at that period of time, it's no secret, Bands of America was having some financial problems, and so by fall of 2008, it became clear that the things that I was hoping to accomplish at the time were not going to be doable because the resources weren't there anymore. And that's why in January of 2009, we agreed that I would split out from Music for All, and I would take the data and research components with me, and which is what I used to then create Quadrant Research, which is the research company that I run to this day and that oversees all the data work. So that was the time where we split that out and began really focusing on how do we gather data from a state perspective and how do we do it at scale. Because when we were doing these surveys like we did in New Jersey, and we actually then did one in New Hampshire and one for Michigan and one for Ohio, they were expensive and they were time consuming and they weren't really scalable because everything was its own project. And so as a result, I started working with the folks at the state education agencies, directors of arts education, called CDAE. They are the Department of Ed folks that are responsible for arts education in all of the state education agencies across the country. Started having conversations with them about, how do we figure this out? How do we fix this puzzle so that we can have data at scale? And so we had to do some work with first the chief state school officers on defining what data states should be gathering. And we made the presentation that the states should be gathering data on all core subjects as defined by the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. CCSSO agreed, that became their policy, that began to shape what data states were collecting. Then we had to work with the National Center for Education Statistics on developing modern set of course codes, because the course codes that they had were from the late 80s, early 90s, and were not reflective at all of what modern practice was. So we worked with them in 2013 in reestablishing those course codes. And then there was money available that the Department of Education put out there that then allowed states, or gave states the money to build their state longitudinal systems. And then there was a law called the America Competes Act that demanded that states gather data on student enrollment in courses. So all of those things came together and created the opportunity that in 2016 we were able to launch what is the Arts Education Data Project, which is the project that we oversee now. And the difference is we're using what we call administrative data from state departments of education that they're gathering from the individual school districts. We're getting the data from the states and then organizing it and then pushing it out into useful interactive dashboards. So that was kind of the transition from leaving Music for All, creating Quadrant Research, figuring out what the model needed to be, and then developing a plan where we could scale. So we were no longer thinking about having to do 50 different projects. We were doing one project 50 times. And that's a big difference when you're trying to scale something.
So I'm going to transition now to let's talk about some advice for folks too. This has been an absolutely fascinating look at your career, and there are so many places we could probably have delved in and done hours more on pieces of it. So maybe we'll have to have you back to do some of that. But
sure.
So we're talking about this work that you have done with the Arts Ed Data Project. Pennsylvania, we are in it. It took us a while to get there, but we are in it. And I tell people, go to PMEA's website. You can find the link where you can look at this. And it is just so user-friendly, and you all continue to refine it to make it even more user-friendly, to find your school data, to find other school data, to find just a variety of metrics that are important. And I always tell people, as you look at what these metrics are, you should be keeping some data in your own program. It's your elementary program, your middle program, high school, and then your school district program. Thinking about some of the metrics that are important and that you can be keeping track of at the local level, because you don't know when you're going to need them. And if you don't have them, well, it's probably going to be really hard to find that information. So I'm curious, from your perspective on that piece of the puzzle for a music educator that has a lot going on already. What is your advice, your take to them about the importance of how they are collecting data, what they are doing, and kind of the importance of it just in general for what you've spoken to it so well in your career path of how you came to realize this. How do we get other people to come to realize this, I guess, is the heart of that question.
Well, I think for anyone, just tracking data on your program is just good practice because it helps you know what's happening with your program. You want to know how many students you have, each year participating. You want to know how many students are coming up from the elementary school. So say you're, a high school director, you want to be aware of how many students are starting in the elementary school, how many students are in the middle school, what percentage of those students are you keeping when they transition from the middle school to the high school. And then in your high school program, tracking how many students do you have, in each grade level, and what percentage of the total population of that grade level does it represent? Because that will tell you what your market share is. Are you gaining market share? Do you have more students involved than before or fewer students? And these things become kind of the barometer to the health of your program, but it also becomes a tool that you can use with your administration to talk about, hey, look, do you realize that 35% of our school population is involved in our band program? These are things to really tout, to educate administrators on the impact that these programs, are having. So it's not just about, and I would encourage folks to share the success stories. How do you do at festival? How many students made it into region? Other things that you can celebrate that came out of the music program, but also talking about how many students are being impacted. Look at how the program is growing. Look at how that's impacting more students across our community. So just tracking those numbers becomes very, very important, as well as being able to document your own class size. Many of our music educators, particularly our instrumental music educators, our choir directors, they handle large class loads. The regular classroom in a high school, 25, max 30 maybe. And you're looking in a band room and it's, 70, 80, 90, 100, a choir room, 200 sometimes. This is important to be able to show, look at the number of students that we're seeing in our programs over time. That will open not only administrators' eyes, but it's also helpful with school board members so that they know. And it ties back to the one thing that we always talk about. You need to develop these relationships in advance, at the beginning of your time at the building. You want to establish relationships. You want to be sharing information about your program. You want to talk about the impact that the program's having on students, not when there's a crisis, but do it all the time. Be your best PR agent for your program and develop your relationships and have parents going to school board meetings to see what's going on and have people go to the school board meetings to thank the school board for supporting the program. I spent 12 years as a school board member here in central New Jersey, and the only time people would come to our meetings was when they wanted to yell at us about something. Nobody ever came to say thank you. So developing these relationships based on gratitude will help establish a connection that will serve you in time of crisis, where all of a sudden there's a budget cut. You've already established a relationship to have an open dialogue with an administrator or, a parent with a school board member. You want to do that in advance of a crisis, not at the beginning of a crisis.
Yeah, and so the 2 points there, that like you're collecting the stories and you're collecting all of that data, and then it's know your audience, which is going to resonate with the person that you're going in front of. It might be both, but it might be, for an administrator who doesn't get music, doesn't get the arts, they weren't a part of it. But if you can show them numbers and think through, well, what is this number telling me? And what is it going to tell them that's going to convince it? I always tell people, do everything you can to put yourself in their shoes, know as much about them, and then figure out what you have to do to convince that piece of the argument. Is that a fair idea?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to understand is usually if there's a cut coming, they're not intentionally targeting the music program. The music program is being targeted as part of a broader issue that they have. So it isn't usually ill will or ill intent when that comes up. They just may not have other options or may not have been aware of other options. So that's where having the relationships will help you be able to show them, hey, maybe there's another way to approach this, or maybe there's a creative solution that gets you what you need but preserves what we want for the music program as well. And there's one other thing that I want to share that most people don't understand. School board members are parents. School board members are community members, right? They're not education specialists. So I was kind of a unicorn that I had the education background that I had while serving on a school board. Most school board members don't have that. What they do have, most of them have arts in their background. Most of them have kids who participated in the arts. They have a predisposition to be supportive of the arts. So it's really important that when approaching them, approach them with that mindset as opposed to, oh, you're the school board member, you're the bad person that's trying to hurt our program. That's really not the case. And when you take that approach, they're automatically going to become defensive, and somebody that's somewhat predisposed to be an ally, you've now pushed to be, potentially somebody that you have to, deal with on the other side. So always remember that school board members are people too.
Right. Okay, so you and I are both part of the planning group for the New Music is Education Coalition. And so we do some webinars and some resources. The website is musiciseducation.org. One of the great resources on there is an AI chatbot that you have done so much work on. Ask Carl B. Could you talk to us about that a little bit?
Yeah, so Carl B is your AI advocacy assistant, and it's named Carl B after my mentor, Carl Brun, who was the first director of market development at NAM. And I refer to Carl as the father of the modern day music and arts education advocacy movement because everything that's going on today really started in 1989, 1990 because of Carl. And so it's a tribute to him, and we wanted to create a resource that people could go to when they couldn't get other people on the phone. They couldn't find you, Mark, in Pennsylvania. They couldn't find me. They couldn't find Mary Lurson. They couldn't find, Lynn Tuttle from ASTA. But have all of the knowledge that we use, put that in this bot that then allows people to ask questions and query the information and get the assistance that they need when they need it. And so that was the idea behind it. How do we unleash the advocacy tools so that people aren't always having to talk to a person, but they could have them immediately at their fingertips, regardless of what their situation was. And so that's what we've done. We've curated, a knowledge base for the chatbot that is based on all of the best materials, the most recent research, the most recent data, on all aspects of music education that people can turn to help them with. I just found out that our administration's thinking about eliminating our pull-out programs. What can you tell me to help combat that? Well, there's pull-out information that's in the chatbot. Or I need to make the case about how music impacts workforce development. We've got a whole section in there about that. And I've seen the way that people have used it has been really amazing because we don't know how people are going to use it until we put it out there. But we've had folks using it to help them with advocacy messaging or letters to school board members or to the superintendent, or help them send a memo to their principal to make the case in supporting their program, or somebody coming in to help align their lesson plan to their state standards. It's been able to do all of these things, and we're right now working behind the scenes on new information that's going to make it even more robust, make it even more valuable to folks that we hope to have out later on this spring. But I mean, it's a great tool right now, but it's going to be incredible in about a month.
Yeah, well, I think it's already incredible. So I don't know what the word is beyond incredible. Okay, so musiciseducation.org. Check that out. You can also see recordings of webinars, information on future webinars as well. So we've covered a whole variety of things today, and but I want to kind of end with a question we have asked some other people for, but I'm really curious for your answer to this. So we really dug into your background, a lot of pieces here. Is there anything that we would be surprised to know about in your background?
Yeah, there's one thing, and you kind of touched on it earlier, and I do want to go into it a little more deeply. The one thing that most people don't know about is that, during 9/11, not only was I
Yeah.
in New York City, I worked triage in Hoboken for people that were coming from New York City by boat to get washed off because there was no transportation running and I couldn't get home. So when I couldn't do anything, I just volunteered and spent the day, out in the sun helping people that were coming, over from the World Trade Center. But in the day after, I was, our offices were closed. I was working from home, and I just kind of felt helpless. And here I am at a network, at VH1 inside the cable industry, and I've been working with all the other networks, with the public affairs committee of the cable industry. And so I was sitting there, what can we do? I felt helpless. I'm like, I got to be able to do something. What is it that I can do? And I was just like, I know what. I'll call up the Red Cross. I said, we've got a television network. I'll call them up, ask them for some public service announcements, and we'll start running public service announcements. That's something we can do. And so when I called up the American Red Cross, the person in their office that was in charge of their public service campaign work was Julie Thurmond. And I got her on the phone and I said, Julie, I have this network and I have connections to all of the networks. If you get us PSAs, we'll get them running on all the networks. And then she said, well, the problem is we don't have the capacity to deal with public service announcements now. And so I was like, well, do you have any scripts? And she goes, well, yeah, we can probably put some scripts together. And then immediately I thought, if they would provide us with scripts, I had the access to our news division to send out news crews to various locations across the country to film celebrities and public officials, to create these PSAs, to drive folks to donate blood and donate money to the American Red Cross to help deal with this huge national crisis that we were facing at the time. And they agreed. She sent me the scripts. I worked with our head of our news division and our talent division. They made arrangements for different celebrities to be taped for these public service announcements. And within 3 days, we had put together a whole national public service campaign that we then fed not only to our networks across MTV networks and CBS, but we sent it up through the National Cable Television Association, and it was distributed to every network across the country, so that we had this nationwide PSA campaign blasting that was raising money and awareness for the American Red Cross. The most famous one was when we were taping Julie, oh geez, now the name forgot me. Famous actress at the time. I want to say Julie Andrews, but it wasn't Julie Andrews. In any event, we filmed this one actress at one taping in Los Angeles, and it became the most impactful PSA of the entire campaign. So, and the reason why I wanted to share that story is, the struggle for me was, how do I make a difference in this environment? And I think that's always kind of been the question that I always ask myself is, how do I make a difference in this environment, even though I may have access to limited resources? There's always something you can do. One person can always make a difference, even if it's in a small way or even in a bigger way. You just have to think about, what is it that I have access to that can make a difference? And that particular example always stays with me because of the fact that I just asked a very simple question. Do you have some PSAs that you can send our way? And then that turned into us running this national campaign for the entire country that led to us being awarded the highest honor from the American Red Cross, which is their Motherland Award. And that's one of the I'm proud of everything that I've done in my career, particularly my impact on music education, because I've always wanted to, my educators had a tremendous impact on my life, and I always wanted to make sure more kids had the same opportunity that I had. And that's always been driving me in my work in advocacy, and every level has been impacting more and more students. This was something totally different. It's like television. How do you make an impact, in that environment? And so, that's the lesson that I want to leave folks with, because most people have no idea that campaign was a campaign that I oversaw and put together on behalf of the entire television industry. But also ask yourself, what can I do to make a difference? And then instead of being paralyzed thinking you can't do anything, just think about doing something small. The key is to do something.
Do something. Exactly. Yeah, well, you've definitely made a difference on so many levels, and we've talked through so many of those. I have learned so much from you over the years, back in my days in the music industry, products industry, when I first met you, and through all these years later. So my personal thanks to you for all that you've done, but kind of on behalf of the industry, music education, thank you, Bob, for the difference that you have made and continue to make. I mean, you continue to really drive all of us in the music education space forward when it comes to data. So it is greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thanks for having me. This has been great.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time. And thank you all for joining us on this edition of PMEA's Take Note podcast. I'll again remind you, go visit musiceducation.org. Check out Ask Carl B and some of the webinars that are posted there. We'll see you next time.